not afraid of who you really are, your brilliance, your chaos, your particular presence, your hardships. I mean, we all have lots of fear, but you're not afraid of yourself.
I'm Heather Grish, and this is the Wisdom of the Body podcast. This podcast explores the idea of body intelligence as the real key to learning the knowledge of life, or what we call Ayurveda in the ancient language of Sanskrit. We do that by connecting with today's creative leaders and experts who will help you listen to your body, trust your gut, and live in deeper harmony with nature. Come join me as we unlock the golden door to clear, direct perception and become very deep listeners. You can find the Wisdom of the Body podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Stitcher. You can also follow us by joining my email at heathergrish.com or on Instagram at heathergrish. I know you're going to love this podcast, so take a second right now to subscribe. Today I'm here with Susan Piver. Susan is a Buddhist teacher, and she's a New York Times bestselling author of The Hard Questions, The Wisdom of a Broken Heart, Start Here Now, The Four Noble Truths of Love, and other books. And her latest book is The Buddhist Enneagram. Piver has been a student of Buddhism since 1993, and she's the founder of the Open Heart Project, a virtual meditation community with 20,000 members all over the world. And she lives in Somerville, Mass, and Austin, Texas. Nice to meet you in the visual flesh and have this conversation with you today. Thanks for being here, Susan.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
That's good. And you're launching a book, so you're probably doing like a ton of podcasts right now. And
I've been lucky to be able to be on some podcasts. Yeah. And it's a joy to be able to talk about this book.
When is the last time you launched a book before this one? What year was it? Was it before
2018?
The pandemic?
Yes, 2018. Okay. Yeah.
Does it feel really different to launch this book than before the last book because we're doing so much more on Zoom now?
Not really, because my work has been online for 9 years. My community is online. The teaching I do is online. We've been on Zoom since Zoom started. So I've become very accustomed to working in the online environment. And the last book, like this one, is self-published. These were my first self-published books. And so that is all predicated on the ability to connect online, as opposed to go to book signings or give talks in person. It's just much less scalable than what you can do online.
That makes sense, actually. My book launched in the middle of the pandemic. My only book, my first book. I'll have more later, I promise. I was really looking forward to that, meeting people in person and stuff like that. And I was kind of bummed. But I see what you're saying. You've been online for a really long time, and it's so much easier to connect with more people this way.
Absolutely. And yeah, you'll have other books and you'll go and meet people and give talks and stuff like that. But it's good to be able to have some familiarity with both ways of promoting your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, your latest book, The Buddhist Enneagram, I have to say that I do not have any experience with the Enneagram. I think I had an old boss when I was in my 20s, who at the time we were doing like Myers-Briggs and the DISC and all these things in the corporate setting. And I think I had this boss who was then like, oh, if you like these, then you should also learn about the Enneagram. And I didn't really understand it a lot, I think, at the time. And I also don't know that I really had enough self-awareness to know what type I was, because I was like in my, early to mid 20s at the time. So I'm really excited to learn about that from you today. And also, I don't have a lot of experience with Buddhism either. And you're a Buddhist teacher. It sounds like you've had a very long history with this lineage. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background? And first, maybe, because I think you probably got into Buddhism first. Is that how it happened?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And I've actually been studying both for around the same time.
Okay.
Which is a long time, like 30 years. I have been a practicing Buddhist. And I started studying the Enneagram around the same time. It completely not connected in any way. But I was lucky to discover Buddhist practices that really spoke to me and teachings in a Tibetan Buddhist lineage And that's been my path. That's been my lineage. That's been my view ever since. I've only practiced in one lineage. I never thought I would be a meditation teacher or a Buddhist teacher. I practiced a lot for maybe 10 or 12 years before I ever attended anything formal. It was a private thing that I did. And then I started going on retreats and so forth. But I'm happy I had that decade of just personal connection with these teachings and practices. And I've always been interested in things like your old boss, ways of describing personalities, and Myers-Briggs and astrology and Colby's and the Enneagram, however, was the one that stuck. And it sticks to this very moment. I have never glimpsed the end of the richness of the Enneagram. It is extremely profound. So Ennea, E-N-N-E-A, is the Greek prefix for 9. And the Enneagram describes 9 ways of being, which I think is a more accurate way of describing it rather than 9 personality types. It's far more vast than that. And your Enneagram type, your number, includes your personality, but it extends far beyond your conventional, this is my opinion, your conventional ways of being in the world to also identify your wisdom presence, your unique wisdom presence.
So where does the Enneagram originate? Does it originate from Greece? Where did it come from?
Well, that is a really good question. And I have gone to the ends of the earth to try to find the answer to this question. Where does it come from? And I believe the answer is nobody really knows, which I find charming and interesting and exciting, because you can't trace it to a person. You can't trace it to a lineage. It belongs to all of us. No beliefs are required to get value from this vast body of knowledge. What's known about it, the first person in recorded history known to talk about the Enneagram was the Greek Armenian mystic Gurdjieff. He taught about it, I think, in the 40s and 50s, but he didn't teach it as a system of personality like we know it. He taught it as a way of understanding natural cycles. I've also heard of a desert father, so-called, named Ramon Lull, L-U-L-L, from billions of years ago, thousands of years ago, who was reported to have talked about something like the Enneagram, but there's nothing recorded on that. So anyway, it's a very long story, actually, but the next person after Gurdjieff known to teach it was a Peruvian mystic named Oscar Ichazo, who taught the Enneagram of personality, the Enneagram that we know of. And he just died maybe 2 years ago. And he had students who made their own contributions, in some cases quite profound, and others just ordinarily wonderful to the Enneagram. So that's what's known about it.
Wow. It's interesting how much humans, we love to have types of things about us to study. Like, I don't really know a lot about human design, but that seems to be one of those things that types. And certainly I have an Ayurvedic background. And even though the doshas and the deha prakritis were like the sort of the dominance of the doshas in your constitution, I view them as more physically based that affect temperament and psychology and things like that. But people have also taken that into becoming something like a personality test. And people, we seem to really love having some lens to have options of types that we can identify as humans. And that we like, there's this question of like, who am I? Oh, I'm this, I think it's like this when we're looking for answers within ourselves. And I don't know the answers that lie within the Enneagram. I'm excited to learn about what I found interesting of the way that you described it in your book, the paths to warriorship, that these 9 types, or that they're actually paths to warriorship. Can you explain why they're paths to warriorship? I found that really intriguing.
Yeah, I'm glad you did. In the lineage that I was trained in, there is a lot of emphasis on spiritual warriorship, not spiritual domination or spiritual aggression or spiritual fighting, but warriorship, because, and I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, to be awake and compassionate and powerful in this world takes a lot of courage. So even like whether it's the doshas or the enneagram or Myers-Briggs or any other system, they can be used to reduce our humanity and reduce the humanity of others, to categorize them, put them in boxes and ghettos and so on. Or they can be used to expand your sense of self and your compassion for other people, because you see, oh, I'm a pitta, and that therefore I have these various qualities, and you're not, you're a vata or whatever you are. So that enables me to see you in a more well-rounded way, as opposed to put you in a box and minimize your humanity. So all of that is the warrior's work, to be awake and compassionate and so on. So the first definition I was ever taught of a warrior was, a warrior is one who is not afraid of themselves. That's where you start. You're not afraid of yourself. You're not afraid of who you really are, your brilliance, your chaos, your particular presence, your hardships. I mean, we all have lots of fear, but you're not afraid of yourself. And at least speaking for myself, and I don't think I'm alone in this, most of my fear was like, I'm not good enough, or I'm not like this person, or I'm not capable of this or that, all of which was true. But that's not a problem, because I didn't see who I was. And the Enneagram really helped me see who I was, so I could stop being afraid of myself. Not that I was great or anything like that, but I'm not like these other people. I don't need to be who people told me I should be. I should be myself. Well, what is that self? Well, the Enneagram really helped me to see, and then not just my own, but other people as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And then coupled with the background in Tibetan Buddhism, how did that play into this for you?
In the Buddhist Enneagram book, or the Journey
Or
to be a
just,
Warrior?
I think, well, I mean, the way you just described understanding yourself, because my experience with Buddhism, I've always kind of, although I will tell you, I find Tibetan Buddhism, the little that I've learned about it, I find it to be a little bit more intriguing than other styles of Buddhism that I've heard of. But I feel like I've always tried to stay away from Buddhism personally, because just that idea of Buddha and like intellect, my intellect is, I'm trying to shut it off. I feel like it's just going all the time. And so Buddhism sort of, for me, made me sort of felt like if I were to go down that path, that I would be like over intellectualizing everything.
Sure.
So I don't know a lot about it. And that's probably not even like a correct assumption, but that was like an assumption that I gathered that it
No,
made
it's
me
not.
Yeah.
It's not incorrect at all. But before I respond, what is it about Tibetan Buddhism that made you think, oh, that seems a little more doable for me?
Interesting. Well, it was, I don't know if do you know David Crow? So he's a old Ayurvedic, I think he owns like an herbal products company. Does he own Floricopia? Is he the one that, I can't remember the name of the herbal products company that he owns, but he studied Chinese medicine and he had studied Ayurvedic medicine. He was one of the earlier people that studied both of those. And he was a student of, or is a student of, Tibetan Buddhism, because I think he also studied Tibetan medicine. And so I don't know, it had something to do with the light and the discussion about light and consciousness, that the way that I heard people describe it seemed more intriguing to me, and more, it didn't feel, again, I'm going based on like two little data points of experience of something, right? But something felt more intriguing because it felt like it was going to teach me something about something I didn't understand, that I couldn't grasp, rather than a lot of the other Buddhist stuff that I feel that I'm exposed to just feels like it's teaching me something I already know. I don't know.
It's heady. Maybe it's heady.
Yeah, it feels heady. It feels heady.
So there are three main cycles of teachings within Buddhism: the Hinayana teachings, the foundational vehicle, the actual words of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths, the Vinaya, the codes of conduct. And there are lineages in the world that are very rooted in Hinayana teachings. And I would not say that Vipassana or insight meditation is rooted in Hinayana solely, but there is a connection there. To me, I'm not a Vipassana teacher or practitioner, but many of the teachers that are known in the West, Jack Kornfield, Sharon Salzberg, they all are from that school, and they're great. No one could say otherwise, I don't think. And there's a coolness in that lineage. And it's also sort of separated, this is my understanding anyway, from a lot of the, what some maybe you might call the religious aspects. It's like, let's take all that out. Let's just talk about it head on. Great. Then the second cycle of teachings, called the Mahayana teachings, are about the heart opening and compassion and transcendent actions and loving kindness and compassion and things that many of us associate with Buddhism. And like the Zen tradition is part of the Mahayana.
Mm-hmm.
It's profound and rigorous. Then there's the Vajrayana teachings, the indestructible vehicle. Mahayana is the great vehicle. Doesn't mean greater, it means you in the greater world. That's my interpretation. The Vajrayana teachings are the mystical teachings of Buddhism. So in every one of the world's wisdom traditions that I know of, there are exoteric teachings and esoteric teachings. The first two cycles, Hinayana and Mahayana, are the exoteric teachings. Open a book, read about them, great. Or study with teacher, even greater. And then the Vajrayana teachings are the esoteric teachings, the mystical teachings, the more inscrutable teachings. And that's where I was trained. So if you look at something like emotions through the three yanas, you'll see them in three different ways. The Hinayana, and this is very broad and overly generalized, would say difficult emotions, anger and jealousy and so on, are afflictive, and you should try to pacify them. And great, if you can do that, good luck, that's great. They are afflictive. They make you do weird bleep, and they cause tremendous pain for yourself and others. Good. Okay, then the second view, the Mahayana view, says, yeah, they're afflictive, but your painful emotions are also bridges of compassion between you and other people. Because when you meet someone who suffers from what you suffer from now, your heart will open to them. So don't just try to get rid of it, try to feel it and explore it and recognize that you will be helpful to someone else in the future because of this. That's great too. The third view, the Vajrayana view, this is all made up by me, by the way, so should take it with a huge grain of salt. It says, yeah, okay, maybe they're afflictive, maybe they're bridges of compassion, but painful emotions themselves are masked forms of wisdom. They are wisdom itself. If you can clear away the discursiveness, the storyline, then you see, oh, well, anger is an energy, a very potentially dangerous one, but anxiety is an energy, sorrow is an energy, and they're value-free. So can you look at your difficult emotions as wisdom voices speaking to you? On good days, maybe yes. But so those are the three different ways of looking at it. And hope I don't want to too long.
Yeah, I don't want to have to look at my emotions. I just want to change everybody around me.
That's the fourth yana, I guess.
No, that's what I'm recovering from.
That's funny.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. It's nice to be around a mind that has such clarity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really getting that. And that's very valuable in today's world because it just seems like we have a lot of mental health issues going on in society. It's like the pharmaceuticals don't seem to work for people that well. Therapist calendars are all full, right? The yoga's not working anymore because all the teachers are sleeping with their students and they...
Shocking.
And like the ketamine and the psilocybin and the ayahuasca ceremonies that everybody's going out and doing, they're working for some people, but they're, also very extreme measures to be taking. So it's like, it just feels like everybody's realized that there's a problem with our minds and they are of different flavors, obviously. And it seems to me that tools like this, like what you're talking about, and I think I feel this way about, when I studied in the yoga lineages, more the philosophical aspects of yoga, that, reading Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, that was like, oh, this is how a mind works.
Mm.
Oh, I just wish somebody had told me that. Like, this is how a mind works. Like, if I know how a mind works, then I could kind of not be surprised and I could like figure out how to work with it. Or I don't know. It's just, it feels like we really need to fill in gaps for people right now to be able to understand themselves, and that a tool like the enneagram, or exposing yourself to wisdom traditions of some sort, is extremely helpful for people, which now that we've got this like society where like religions have been on the decline and, things like that, there just seems to be like a lot of people kind of lost mentally right now.
I agree. It's a very painful time. So it's a very painful time, and there's a lot to parse. And what we may have been taught works, like you were just saying, may not work because it's an overwhelming time. And we are so lucky, you and I, to have been able to find any source that speaks to us, that explains this is how your mind works. Patanjali Sutras being one example, Buddha Dharma another one, and for me, the Enneagram are examples of that. So as I was taught, there are two ways to work with difficult emotions. Broadly speaking, if trauma, that's a different category, that no one should think this applies to trauma, because that is its own category, needs its own special kind of care. But otherwise, with more conventional forms of suffering, one way is get away from it. Just stop, change your life, change your world, change your location. Don't expose yourself to what hurts. And that is great if you can do it. But then your world shrinks and over time becomes smaller and smaller, because there's nowhere I can go that not just go, look, talk, that isn't likely to hurt me right now. So the second way is the opposite, like expand to include what you feel. Not as good or bad, but it just is. Go towards it, open to it. Again, not trauma, that's different, but can you expand to include everything you feel? And usually the answer is I can, especially if you have some sort of meditative practice, meditation of body or mind. Then you learn to sort of stay with, hopefully without being run over. So the practice, I think, really helps. Meditation practice, in particular, mindfulness or whatever one might call it, with that expanding to include what you feel instead of working on it, because we worked on it a lot. And meditation, in a sense, is saying, stop. Yeah, do your self-improvement things. God, I write self-help books, so I'm not against that. But this is a chance for you to stop working on yourself and just be yourself. And somehow from that tiny gesture of mind, which is also vast in its consequence, you see that you are strong and you are wise and you can do it. It comes from relaxing, not working harder.
Yeah. So it's like less about fixing and solving and more about just accepting.
With love.
Mm.
And even your inability to love yourself or others, you can accept that with love too. To create an inner environment of some warmth is very helpful.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit? I don't know if we have time to go through all of them, or, the paths of warriorship, or give me a couple of examples of those paths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Enneagram, if you've ever seen it, it's a diagram, a circle with 9 numbers around it, and they're connected by various lines. And a way to start understanding the system and finding where you are on it, because each of us are one of those numbers, is to note that it is 9 numbers, but they're in 3 groups of 3, according to primary center of intelligence. So you were talking about things being heady and intellectualizing and so on. Maybe you're in this triad or maybe you aren't, but that's one of the forms of intelligence. And when it's your strongest, you could be a 5, a 6, or a 7, because that's the mental triad. The people that go through the world wanting to understand, wanting to learn, holding knowledge as highly valuable. And it is, but only for 1/3 of us is it the most important thing. And then the second triad, 8, 9, and 1, are called the instinctive triad. People for whom instinct, the intelligence of instinct, predominates. So I don't know how I knew it, I just did. They just have a strong intuitive intelligence. And then 2, 3, and 4, the third of the three, is the emotional triad. People that navigate this world using their emotional intelligence, not just, oh, I'm good at talking to people or I have a lot of feelings, but in order to know what something is, I have to know how I feel about it. Otherwise, I don't know what it is. Like, it doesn't have any reality to me. So those are the 9, according to Center of Intelligence. And each center has a kind of, very broadly speaking, a default response to stress and pain. So for 5, 6, and 7, the mental triad, when things don't go their way, they think more. They rely on their thinking. Thinking speeds up. What if this? If I put that over there, why did they say this? I shouldn't have done that. Just keep thinking. And that's a sign of anxiety. It's called anxiety. Of course, we all have anxiety, but for 1/3 of us, that's the predominant response. 8, 9, and 1, the intuitive triad, when things don't go their way, they get angry. So we have all known people, or we may be that the person who responds to life's difficulties with anger. And the other 2/3 of us don't. And 2, 3, and 4 could respond with the feelings kind of going out of whack, becoming depressive or grasping and or super needy. And we're all needy and anxious and angry, but one of those is the first response. So that's one place to start finding yourself.
So is this, because I find this with Ayurveda, where are there people who are actual like practitioners who are trained in assessing, or are you supposed to assess yourself with the enneagram?
Yeah, that's a really good question too. So yes, there are people who are trained. Are they well trained? I cannot tell you. However, I can tell you that in my opinion, there is no test for the enneagram. There are countless tests, I should say, but there's no good test. If you want to know your Myers-Briggs, there's a test. If you want to know your Colby's, there's a test. They're very reliable instruments. There is no such equivalent in the enneagram, although there are many free tests. So it requires a lot of self-reflection. And the best way to learn it is to talk to someone that knows the system. But no one can type you, no one. And if someone says, I will type you, then you should leave, because you're the only one who can type yourself. Now, there are other people who can say, well, is this your predominant response to stress? Or do you have problems making decisions? Or, do you cry a lot? Whatever it is. And according to your answers, they can help steer you in a particular direction, but no one can tell you the type that you are except yourself.
So you're not sitting here trying to guess what I am.
Of course I am. No, I mean, I can't help it. But you give certain little clues, and I don't know. And I seriously would never know. But when you say I over intellectualize, or it was too heady for me, then I think, oh, maybe she's a 5, a 6, or a 7. But of course, I don't know.
Or maybe I'm fighting my true nature of being heady.
Maybe you are. But each type also has a talking style. And that often is the tell. So the talking style for 5, for example, is called treatise. I'll make a case, an intellectual case for whatever it is I'm talking about. Each type has an idealization, an avoidance, a fixation, and an arc of transformation, like a journey to make from a vice or a passion, as it's called in the Enneagram, to a virtue. And just like in Buddhism, the vices and virtues are flip sides of one coin, so it is with the Enneagram. You have a neurosis, and it's not a problem. It's your wisdom trying to get your attention, you could say.
Give me an example of a vice and a virtue.
Sure. So for type 8, let's just go with 8 on the gut triad, big energy, all the gut energy, all the intuitive energy is expressed, and they're big personalities. The vice or the passion is called lust, and it doesn't mean necessarily sexual lust. It means for anything that makes them feel powerful and enables them to dominate a situation they're in, because these are people that are interested in control and dominating. So the idealization of 8 is I am competent. You can't tell me something I don't know. The avoidance is vulnerability. The talking style is called laying trips. Whatever you're talking about, you don't need to know that. Why is the enneagram important? You don't need that. You should move on. Some way of speaking like that. But the virtue is called innocence. So the journey is from lust to innocence. And it doesn't mean from sexual to pure, whatever those words mean. It means instead of trying to grasp in every situation what will give me dominance and sussing out who's vulnerable and who's weak and how can I take over whatever it is I'm interested in, I show up in the situations of my life innocently, just interested. Well, what is it? Maybe I want to dominate it, maybe I don't. But I'm not walking in with that preconceived agenda. I'm just going to see what actually is. So that's a very profound journey.
This sounds very helpful. And you've written several books on relationships. So this sounds very helpful for relationships. And, I was reading the intro to the book, the Enneagram, Buddhist Enneagram book. And you were saying, like, if I had only known, you were talking about working with a colleague. And you were like, if I had only known that, this was his type, then I wouldn't have been coming at him the way that I was doing it. So if we understand, like, is understanding somebody else's type, and does that then, because I think there's this big debate about, like, oh, you should just be you. You shouldn't be like flexing your style to meet other people or whatever. Like, just do you, right? But that also has its drawbacks.
Yeah, it's very unrelational. Just do you. Well, who are you, first of all? And second of all, what is this you that shows up at work? And who is this you that goes to bed with a partner? And who is this you that has children? And I mean, where are those people in this conversation, in the relationship? There's not just you. I was quite shocked to find that out. There's someone else. So if you are interested in connecting with other people, if you're interested in working well with them, if you're interested in loving them more deeply, you can't just show up and go, just be you. You need to open your heart and your mind to who they are. And sometimes, otherwise, you're just in a relationship with yourself because you're seeing everyone and everything through the lens of your own projections. And that's very unkind. Of course, we all have projections and lenses and so on, but the Enneagram and other mindfulness practices help you love because they help you release the people in your life from your projections of who they are or should be or who you wish they were. And instead, you can see them. You might like them, you might not. But until you have some sense of space, like, who is this person outside of my own mind? It's not love. I don't mean to sound so unilateral, but it's a bargain that you've made with someone. You can show up and be you, and I can show up and be me, and we won't get angry at each other. Well, I don't know if that's a relationship exactly. But so just a short example, I, on the Enneagram, am the number 4. And my journey is not from lust to innocence. It's from envy or longing to equanimity. My idealization is I am special, very, very special. And my avoidance is ordinariness. I don't want an ordinary life, and I don't want to be perceived as ordinary. That's different than I'm competent and so forth. So my husband, my partner, is a 1 on the Enneagram. His journey is from anger to serenity. And his idealization is I am right. I am correct. That's really different than I am special. And his avoidance is anger. And mine is ordinariness. So if we get in a disagreement, my attention wants to go to what about me, about us, what is there to learn here, and so forth and so on. His attention goes to where was the mistake made? That's also important, not to me, but to him. Because once he sees, well, this is where we went off track, or I said this and I shouldn't have, or you misunderstood this or that, he starts to feel like, okay, now we're fixing this, we're healing this. He's just over there. He just said, that's because I'm right. Very funny. His idealization is I am right. So
that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie.
Thanks for that.
It's taking out the trash now. So thank you. So I want to know what it means. When I can say to him, I see what went wrong. I'm reaching out to him with, I care about you. So I don't know how I would have been. I mean, we've been married for 24 years. I just don't think we could have been married for 24 minutes without the enneagram. For me, he's not interested in it, but it really helps me.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, if he was interested in it as well, or if it's been more of an inner tool for you. And it's interesting, isn't it crazy how if we can shift something within us, then somehow that then shifts the whole
Totally.
of the relationship?
Agreed. And can you make space in the way you see the other person and for the other person in the way they move through the world, barring trauma and abuse? Obviously, those are different categories. But can you see this person? Like, I don't care who's right or wrong. I mean, maybe later, but that doesn't help me. But it doesn't matter that it doesn't help me. It matters that it helps him. And what helps me should matter to him, and does. It's helped me in my relationship by letting me see how, in my case, my husband's mind works and where his attention is going to go in any given situation. So according to the Enneagram, 9 people walk into the room, their attention is going to go to 9 different things. But we don't know that. We all think that this is what everyone should pay attention to. So when you see where someone else's attention is going to go, you can meet them there. And you let them off the hook for being different. The thing that always comes up for me in my marriage, and I did write a book about this too, called The Four Noble Truths of Love, is, do I want you to be the person I want you to be, or do I want you to be who you are? And it's rarely that simple, but the more I can let go of, this is who I need you to be for me. Not that my needs are unimportant, they are extremely important. But if I only focus on what I need you to be, then I'm still just in a relationship with myself. Can I see who you really are? And some of it I'm going to love, and some of it I'm not going to love. But if I see you, then I can love you. So that it's enormously helpful. I don't know if I gave you a good example, but in our arguments, it helps in understanding what is important to the other person that may or may not be important to the other person. It's very loving to acknowledge those things.
And I love how you said, like, if you do want to connect with this other person, like, that's an important thing. If you do want to connect with this other person, then, so how do we know when we're projecting? Like, when can we spot it?
That's a good question. I'll tell you my my red flag that I look for is when I have absolutely lost all sense of humor. I'm in the grip of something that's very painful and difficult. I'm not saying that if someone hurts my feelings or if things don't go my way, that it's funny. It isn't. But if I've lost all sense of humor because of you and what you did, there's probably something else going on in addition to what you said and what you did that also may be really wrong and painful. But if I can keep any openness in my mind, then I'm probably not fully projecting. But my mind shrinks to the size of a pea and I have 0 laughs, no humor, then that's not good for me.
So everyone sort of has their own tells, it sounds like, with projection based on how we got screwed up by our parents growing up or something.
Probably. But I think when anyone loses their sense of humor, and I'm not saying you should make jokes or make light, but when there's no possibility of humor, then that's bad. And I'm not just because I like to laugh. I'm saying it because we're not seeing each other in the fullness of who we really are.
Wow. So there's so many good nuggets so far, but what would you say is like the one most important thing that, or is there an intention, or is there one most important thing that you think is the key to a successful relationship?
Well, if I had to pick one, I would say it is to recognize that relationships never stabilize, ever. They're always changing and going away and getting closer and being great and being terrible. And it never stabilizes. No one told you that. No one told me that. Like, oh, we'll fix these problems or we'll get to know each other in this way or that. And then, it's going to be smooth sailing. No, never. Relationships never stabilize. And when you think they should, and they should have stable periods for sure. Things can look bleak, but when you think, oh, well, it's never going to stabilize, this is how it is, then you can be curious and interested in what's happening in a different way, I think. What do you think?
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think in my relationship, I have a lot of tension with my partner because he's never wanted to get married and has a lot of like resistance to that idea of marriage and stuff like that. And I'm always like, that sounds like a really peaceful thing to me. And I've never fully understood his aversion to it.
That's interesting.
And my friends will ask me, and everybody in my life will ask me, and I'll be like, I just can't get at it. I just can't, with all of, therapy and like everything, like just can't quite understand the aversion. But then I'm like, well, is my issue that I want to get married? You know what I mean? It's like,
That's not a problem though.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a sign of aversion personally. You're totally entitled to want that. I mean, does he understand his aversion? Do you think?
Does he what?
Understand his aversion?
No, I don't think he does. I don't think he does. Yeah.
And it's impossible for you.
Exactly. So that's the thing. So in order for another person to understand you, do you have to know yourself?
To some degree. I mean, there's no hard and fast rule about anything on earth, but yes, it really helps. Self-knowledge, really, really important to establish a loving relationship, to have boundaries and insight, and to know your preferences about various things outside of what anyone told you they should be. But it also, I think you get to know yourself when you are loved. So I know people say before you love someone else, you have to love yourself. Yeah, okay. But I think it also works the other way around. When someone else loves you, you love yourself. And I think it's the same with just knowing who you are and sharing that. When you're in a loving container, or environment, self-knowledge is more readily available. That's my experience.
That's so beautiful. Well, I'm going to pick up your book and read it and see if I can improve my relationship with it.
I hope you'll find it beneficial.
No pressure, Susan.
Oh yeah, okay? No, we got this. No problem. I hope you'll find it useful. I really do. It's an incredibly profound journey to look for your type and then look for the type of people you love, but to hold that very loosely because we don't really know other people.
It's hard, right? Because I feel like whenever you start learning stuff about this, you can't help but want to be like, oh, and that's why that person is like that, but like, it sounds like more of the key is to understand, not more, but like it's at least equally as important to understand yourself.
Oh, fully. And when it comes to typing others, I can't help. I've been studying it for 30 years. I sort of think, oh, that person might be this or that. But instead of saying that person's a 7, I try to say to myself, I feel the energy of 7. Not you are a 7, but I feel the energy of 7. I feel the energy of 2. Okay, that's what's happening right now. But I don't really know if you're a 7 or a 2. It's none of my business.
That's important. And for anybody listening who's into Ayurveda, that's, I feel the energy of Vata. I feel the energy of Pitta. I feel the energy of Kapha. I am not a Vata. I am not a Pitta. I am not a Kapha. Yeah. That's it's huge. Like, because like you're saying, it's like once it becomes fixed, like same thing with relationships, it's like they are always changing. I love that. I think that's incredibly helpful to think about that.
I'm glad. It was helpful to me. Truly helpful to me. I'm like, oh, I can stop trying to make this thing solid.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know we went a little bit over time and I feel like I could talk with you forever, actually. I love listening to you. And it's been
I'm so glad we could do this. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you. I feel like we could talk forever too.
Yeah. I know you have, the Open Heart Project, and tell people how they can learn more about your work and how to work with you, how to connect with you.
Thank you. So the Open Heart Project, openheartproject.com, that's my online community. It's a community of practitioners. I send out videos and we have classes and all about meditation and Buddhist practices and the spiritual journey altogether, Buddhist or not. And it's a very vibrant community of independent thinkers, I would say, who want to go the distance. They don't want an easy fix. They don't want to cut the corners in the spiritual journey. So anyway, it's a joyful place, the Open Heart Project. And that's the best place for people to connect with me.
I love it. And if you are that kind of person, what she just said will sound joyful to you. You know?
Good point.
You know, we come in all types, but I'm sitting here going like, yes.
Right? So good. That's why we're liking talking to each other. If you're looking for an easy fix or 3 steps to do this or that, you can find them, but not at the Open Heart Project.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for being here today, Susan, and look forward to diving more into your work.
Thank you. A pleasure to talk with you. I'm glad we could do it.
If you are embarking on a fertility journey and are ready to have your mind blown about what your body is really capable of and how it's impacted by the environment, then check out my book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. You can actually download the introduction to the book for free on my website at heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. Read the intro for free and then buy the rest of this fertility enlightening book pretty much anywhere books are sold. Thank you for tuning in and dropping in with us today. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I really want to hear your feedback. To learn more about my work, visit heathergrish.com. That's Heather, GRZYCH.com. And meet me here next time on The Wisdom of the Body.